Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about domain and range, but with domain and range, we're going to talk about two different forms or two different ways to write it. So inequality notation and interval notation. Now, inequality, we're going to obviously use inequality symbols. And so remember, one thing I want you to remember is domain, we're talking about all of your x values. Range, we're talking about all of your y values. So domain, we're looking from left to right. We're looking at the leftmost point on that coordinate plane on your graph or the rightmost point on that coordinate plane. So, for example, in this case, the leftmost x point that I have is right here at -4. So because that is the leftmost point at -4, that means that my left bound is going to be -4. Because I want to write an inequality notation, I'm going to use one of these two symbols. Now, I have an open circle here, meaning that this value of x does not actually equal -4, but it can get right up to it. It can be -3.999 repeated. It just cannot be -4. So I need to use the less than symbol without the equal to sign. Now, because domain is talking about our x values, we're going to use x for that and then figure out our rightmost point. So as I start from the left with my graph, I'm going to go travel to the right, and I'm going to go as far as I can go. This arrow means that we continue on forever. So yes, this arrow goes up forever, but notice how it's also going to the right forever. And so because it goes to the right, the number that we use for that is going to be infinity. So because that goes to the right forever, I'm going to use infinity. Now, this is not a point that I can just go and plot. If I said, hey, go ahead and plot me the point infinity, you wouldn't be able to do it. So because it's more of a concept, an idea that goes on forever, we're going to just use the less than symbol and not put the equal to sign there. All right, now what about range? So range is dealing with all of your y values. And remember, your y values go up and down. So now, instead of left and right, now I'm looking from my lowest point to my highest point. So as I start from the bottom, and now we're here, I'm going to look and find the lowest point, which occurs right here when my y value is 1. Now notice how we do have points on this line, means it can equal 1. We have a possible points where y is equal to 1. So because that's my lowest, I'm going to go ahead and start with 1 here, but I'm going to use the equal to sign because it can be equal to 1. Now as I travel up, notice how I hit a stopping point here, but there are other parts of my graph that go up forever. So because of this arrow going up forever, then I need to go to positive infinity. It is possible to have a y value at 4 because this arrow will cover all the values of 4 or 5 or 6 or 100 or whatever. And so because that's going up to infinity and I'm doing with y values, I'm going to say y and then less than infinity. How we read these is for domain, all of my x values are going to be somewhere in between -4 to positive infinity, and all my y values are going to be somewhere in between a +1 and a positive infinity. Be careful with knowing when to use the equal to symbol and when not to use it. So if we have an open circle, we want to use the inequality symbol that does not have the equal to symbol. All right, now interval notation. I actually like interval notation. I think a lot of people seem to find it's a little bit easier. Sticking with the concept of open circle, closed circle, we use parentheses when we have an open circle. We're going to use brackets when it can equal that point, or we have a closed circle. So parentheses kind of denote open circle, brackets kind of denote closed circle. And remember, infinity is one of those weird ones. Anytime we have negative infinity or positive infinity, we're going to use parentheses kind of denoting an open circle because I can't actually physically plot that point. Now, domain and range, remember that's all of our x values. So x-axis, we're looking left to right, so x-axis. So left comma right, I want my leftmost or my lowest value first. This is -5, it's kind of hard for you to see, but this is -5. It is an open circle, so that means I'm going to have to use a parenthesis because it's an open circle. So I'm going to say parenthesis, -5. I'm going to separate it with a comma, so it almost looks like a coordinate point, but this is notation for domain and range. Now, what is my largest or the greatest x value I have? So as I travel down this graph, I have a point right here at positive 5, and notice how it's a closed circle. So because it's a closed circle, I'm going to say positive 5, and I'm going to close this with a bracket. So notice I had one point that was an open circle, so I had to use a parenthesis. And then I had another point, 5, that had a closed circle, so I have to use a bracket. And so sometimes that can happen. You can have two parentheses, two brackets, or one of each. Finally, for range, now we have to flip our brain. We're looking at our y-axis. So here's our y-axis. So now I'm changing my mind to think about lowest to highest. What is the lowest point I get? Well, you might say, hey, look, it's -2 and it's an open circle. That is true, but there are also other points that are also -2. We have this little stretch of the graph that's -2. We have this point here that's -2. Anytime you have an open circle and a closed circle, the closed circle kind of overrides it. And so the way we're going to look at this is, yes, it can be -2, but we're going to use a bracket because there is a point that does equal -2 for that y value. Now, as we travel up, we're trying to look for, there's nothing up here, so where's the highest this reaches? The highest it reaches is here. Now, you might say, well, hey, there are no points on that graph. Well, sure there are. It's just there are no endpoints like what we have here, but there are plenty of points. There's, a point here, a point here, a point here, a point here, a point here. There are numerous points in that segment. So the highest that we can get is going to be +2, and because there are points on that spot, then we're going to say comma, +2 with a bracket, because we can have coordinate points that have a y value of 2.